My name is Robin Budish. We are going to begin our monthly Transit Choices meeting by introducing, and we are thrilled to have Secretary Greg Slater, Department of Transportation, with us as our first guest presenter. Secretary Slater will be sharing with us a presentation titled Impact of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act on Maryland's Transportation System. Without further ado, good morning, Secretary Slater.
Good morning, and thank you for that great introduction. It's great to be here, but also great to see a lot of familiar faces. Looks like my old friend Don is going to be going right after me, and my friend Greg Hinchcliffe I haven't seen in a little while, since I think the last time I saw him was when we did the bike accommodations on the MARC trains. But great to see everyone. But thank you once again. I look forward to talking about what we have going on today in terms of our transit systems, because we do have a lot going on, and then what might be on the horizon if we are fortunate enough to make some progress on that infrastructure bill in DC. So with that, I'll jump right into this and kind of first, let me frame a little bit of what I'm going to talk about today. Just to give you an overview of the topics I'll cover, starting off with some things we are tackling right now through our existing and ongoing capital program. This includes enhancements that we're making to improve the customer experience as we're welcoming riders back through improved system operations, but also some network enhancements. Then I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, as well as where we see Maryland's transit system really benefiting from this federal package. And this includes areas like facility improvements, fleet replacement, and new and improved transit connections, as well as some enhancements in our LOTS programs. When I look at, let me start off with some of the customer enhancement pieces, because it's a really important part of what we're experiencing here in Maryland. You might be aware we're just about midway through our annual CTP tours, and that's a program where we visit every county, either in person or virtually, over about a 2-month period. And then we talk about our draft 6-year program. As part of our draft MDOT program, we're putting a real focus on how we welcome previous riders back to the system, as well as attract new riders with an improved customer experience. So we're doing this through this new program that we've created called a Customer Experience Enhancement Program, the CEEP. And so what we're starting off on this program with is a $43 million investment that's going to focus on a few different things. One, more dedicated bus lanes. We think they're a big part of how we rebuild our system and kind of build out our system. And we're starting on some key corridors like Charles Street, St. Paul Street, Preston and Biddle. We're looking at Fayette, and then looking at York Road as that north-south connection. But we're closely coordinating with Baltimore City.
See anyone on here?
I'm sorry?
Please continue.
We're closely coordinating with Baltimore City on the priorities to kind of hone in on the exact corridors with frequent bus service, but corridors that have some travel time delays for one reason or another. To analyze the effectiveness of these corridors, we're going to use before and after data, as well as observations, and track and monitor and how the lanes are functioning from an operational but also an enforcement perspective. In addition, we're looking at really enhancing our bus stops and transit hubs so that they're more inviting for our customers and more comfortable. So we're adding a lot of additional bus shelters, ADA upgrades, access upgrades, but really doing this under the lens of equity, focused on neighborhood locations and really building the system out. So these improvements are going to support our regional transit plan goals of adding 100 bus shelters to low-income areas by 2025, and upgrading those ADA stops from 19% to 30% by 2025. So we're really on track to meet those goals and starting in these areas. We're also going to be working to improve the wayfinding around these areas and making the communications more customer-friendly through targeted improvements on our light rail and metro systems, and then additional real-time and customer information on the bus network and hubs and bus stops. And so we're also kind of focused on communicating with our customer, but also how transit can be better supported through bike and shared mobility programs. So completing all the bike racks in the program at our MARC
Okay,
station.
let's be careful.
We're looking at providing additional corrals for bike and scooter parking along the system, and then additional bike and transit education and outreach as part of our system. So we're really excited about this program, and we think it's going to be a great addition. You know, as I think about how we're making our program better, I have to start on kind of the operational improvements as well as that customer experience. You know, we can do a lot, but I also feel like it's very simple. People want safe, reliable transit systems that they can count on. And so thinking about that operational. So I'm really excited about the positive impacts that we're going to have on the system, but most importantly, the impacts for our customers. But I'm really proud. I'll take a kind of sidebar here for a minute and say I'm really proud of the service that the team has been providing through this pandemic. They've really shown some dedication, but we're certainly seeing travel patterns start to return back to normal. So we're still recovering on the workforce side, but our customer side is coming back a much faster pace. So we're facing some challenges, and we're keeping our performance stats. Right now, they're below where they want to be. We have some challenges on our operator side that we're trying to tackle. So we have a number of service that's canceled every day because either our operators are not available for them being exposed to the virus or one thing or another, or one of their children or family members were exposed, so they have to kind of stay home. So we're canceling, a certain percentage of our trips every day simply because we can't do that. And then we are certainly not immune to the supply chain issues right now. We do have a number of buses that are out of service today, kind of waiting for parts as part of the supply chain challenges. So we're going to continue to focus on that. But there's a national shortage on commercial drivers. You've been hearing a lot about the school bus driver shortage and those types of things, but we're not immune to that as well. And we're looking at some strategies and trying to impact that by really just trying to overprogram and recruit and hire and continue to focus on that. But our team, led by our acting administrator, Holly Arnold, is really committed to implementing additional strategies and resources to continue to enhance how we recruit and retain operators, because we want to get to that 80% on-time performance level that we know our customers rely on. So we are additionally focused on enhancing that operational side to our fare collection system. So we're tackling different elements of our operations, and one of which is this $64 million that we've invested in overhauling our entire fare collection system. This new system is going to allow immediate access to kind of stored value and fare products loaded into an account, as well as support flexible fare capping options and mobility dynamics that we can get into. But, components of this new system are going to be kind of starting to phase in the beginning of 2023. We just got approval from the Board of Public Works, and the system is going to be fully operational by 2025. But I'm really excited that we've been able to get this project off the ground at a time where we were facing some pretty significant budget challenges. And I'm looking forward to how this, as well as some of the other pieces, can really help us in that customer experience and welcome our riders back. So a big part of what we're trying to count on here is some of our federal partners. So, as I touched a little bit on what we have in the hopper in our program, but this IA program, if it were to become law, could really have a great impact on the program and potentially add to what we are doing. Just by way of background on kind of so everybody's aware of where the bill is today, the Senate has passed the IIJA, but the House of Representatives is still working on it, still working through it. The impetus for Congress to act on the IIJA is the Surface Transportation Authorization, which is the mechanism by which USDOT presently is funded, which was scheduled to lapse at the end of September. After the House came to an impasse last month, Congress extended that through the end of October. So the end of this month is the next time that if Congress is unable to come to an agreement, USDOT would lose its Surface Transportation Authorization. So we're staying really engaged in that. But at the same time, I remain hopeful that this IIJA will pass Congress and be signed by the president later this month. I know the governor played a large role in kind of pushing the infrastructure conversation and kind of reach some consensus through the bipartisan infrastructure package. And I think it's going to do a lot of good for a lot of agencies across this country. But even locally, I'm happy to talk through a few elements that we see benefits, including facility replacements, some fleet replacement, some new and improved transit connections. I'm going to talk a lot about our Frederick Douglass Tunnel, which used to be the BMP Tunnel, that we're really excited to get some energy behind, as well as our LOTS program. So let me start on the facility side. So one of our big priorities here is this critical and emerging area that we see industry-wide is these kind of zero, not only our facilities, but also this conversion to zero emission vehicles. And so an important component of our zero emission vehicle transition is the strategy and facility enhancements that we're going to need. And the Eastern Bus Division is one of these. So the existing Eastern Bus Division is located near kind of Bayview community. It was originally constructed in the 1930s. So it's obsolete, it's constrained, and it just can't adequately support our current fleet. And we know it cannot support the addition of electric buses or zero emission buses. So we're redeveloping this facility and we'll substantially promote some operational enhancements as part of that. So while we're planning, while our planning efforts are actively underway, our draft CTP adds nearly about $165 million in the out years of our program to initiate construction activities for this important facility. So it's going to be focused on this facility in particular. We want to be focused on serving all electric buses. And so I was fortunate enough to celebrate with MTA earlier this year at the opening of that new Kirk bus facility. And we saw firsthand the positive benefits that it not only has on the operations, but our team, our customers, the community that's around it, and the positive benefits that we see from a project like this. So I do want to take a moment and highlight the workforce considerations that we have on our electric bus side or our zero emission vehicle side, because we're already thinking about that. So as well as converting this facility into a facility that's going to serve us for decades into the future and serve our zero emission bus fleet. We also are looking at extensive employee training, new job descriptions, new training, those types of things. Mechanics moving towards more of an IT technician than a traditional mechanic. Changes to our agency procedures for scheduling and bus assignments and field supervision and maintenance, so that when this facility is done, we can really take advantage. But we know the coordination right now, we're working with our union and through our collective bargaining contracts, and those changes are going to be critical as we kind of set the next foundation for this workforce. So another category of facility that we think is really going to benefit is the redevelopment around Penn Station. So we have a role in this, and the private sector has a role in this one. So, but it's also one that I'm pretty excited about when you think about it as a whole in terms of all the other things that we have going on. But the facility enhancements at Penn Station is an area where I'm really looking forward to seeing that mix of federal, state, local, and private investment, because I believe it's going to have a transformational impact on the station, our customers, and the community that it sits in. Coordination efforts are currently underway with both the public and private sector. I spoke to Amtrak this week, and we were at the table to move forward a set of improvements that are going to modernize the station and that surrounding area in particular. But earlier this year, I took some time and toured some of the lesser utilized kind of upper mezzanine areas of Penn Station. It's pretty fascinating, some of the history that's up there. But I can attest firsthand the need for this investment, but also the amazing potential that we have in this station if we're willing to kind of rally around it. But what we hope to bring to the table as a department for this area is a package of multimodal access improvements around the station. So our team at MTA led the development and submission of a RAISE grant application in 2020 for funding of some of these improvements. And so we're rallying around that package right now. We weren't successful in the RAISE grant, but we're continuing to kind of focus there. These are bus lanes, these are new pickup and drop off areas, some pedestrian and safety improvements, as well as bike parking, shared mobility areas, and some other investments. But we're targeting a total investment of about $10 million for these improvements around the station. And we've been working through the past year to make sure the efforts are on the radar of our federal delegation, who's really been a great partner with us. But we're looking forward to continuing to work with Amtrak, the private developer, which is Penn Station Partners, as well as some of the community members, the University of Baltimore, community partners, on ways to prioritize transit in the redevelopment or the redeveloped station and to improve that bike and pedestrian access, as well as some parking areas around that station. This is one of those great land use components that are going to drive some of the growth that we see in our system. Switching over to the fleet side. So I can't stress this enough. We're really at a point where we're thinking about our fleet and what the next generation of our fleet is. And so I touched on some of the goals for our fleet replacement with that Eastern bus facility, but our goals for zero emission vehicles are much broader and a little bit more extensive. Our goal is to have 50% of our bus fleet, and that's approximately 380 buses, converted to zero emissions by 2030. So I'm talking about 8 years from now, 9 years from now. You know, that's a pretty lofty goal, and we're really focused on that. So we've already replaced the other half of our fleet with more fuel efficient, kind of clean diesel buses, and that should be done by 2023. And then the other half, which is going to complement with these zero emission buses, is going to complement our light rail, our metro, and our MARC fleets that are continuing to be upgraded now. But by 2024, we will have 53 light rail vehicles completely overhauled, 63 MARC coaches completely overhauled, and 6 MARC locomotives, as well as 78 of our metro cars replaced. So, you know, they were all kind of hitting their useful life at the same time. And this is one of those things that is one of those kind of once in a generation type projects of replacing a lot of those vehicles. I'm going to touch on the BMP tunnel, the Frederick Douglass tunnel, a little bit later in the presentation, but it's important to note that as part of the development of that project, we came to an agreement with Amtrak that we were going to run electric trains in that tunnel. And so that gave us the ability to remove some of the more extensive ventilation shafts that were part of the cost of the project. So we started to purchase what we call these dual locomotives. So they can switch back from between diesel and electric. So, you know, they can run on the Camden line and they can run on the Penn line in different modes. So many of you, I'm sure, as I know, Don was really involved in these kind of RTP corridors. And so I want to talk a little bit about those because I think they're a really important part of our future and development as part of our system, because our system needs to be adaptable and integrated and smart and really serve the people who need us the most. And so our team at MTA recently completed this 25-year regional transit plan for Central Maryland. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the plan. And I will take a minute and thank you for your support, your input, and your involvement, because it was really critical in getting us where we are today. But the outcome of the plan includes 30 immediate strategies to implement over the first 5 years, along with 11 what we call early opportunity corridors. So we're currently implementing plans for 2 of those early opportunity corridors, one that goes north-south and one that goes east-west. And I'm happy to share that one of the largest investments in our planning and design across all of our modes in our draft CTP this year was more than $19 million to advance these 2 corridors through the NEPA process and into the preliminary engineering to get them shovel ready. We also recently applied to US DOT for a RAISE grant. We haven't heard back from that one yet, but it's a RAISE grant to support additional and hopefully kind of short-term enhancements along that east-west corridor while we advance the planning and design for that longer-term solution. We did this in partnership with the city, and we have our federal delegation really engaged in this. But you know, we're seeking about $25 million in those discretionary dollars from that grant program that would be matched with state and city funds for about a $50 million total project cost. And so what that's going to include is approximately 10 miles of dedicated bus lanes along that east-west route, transit signal priority along the route, bus shelters throughout the entire corridor, pedestrian safety improvements at those key intersections, real-time information and signage for the corridor, lighting improvements at bus stops, and curb extensions and ADA compliance components at each of the key intersections. So frankly, I believe the $50 million is going to be pretty transformational for that corridor as well. But I think I'm just really excited about how we can take that and build upon that longer term vision as that NEPA process continues to go. And so, you know, on top of that, we're looking at how we can continue to advance our MARC system. And another important project that we have in our D&E program today in the pipeline is our Penn Camden connector. So what this project is going to do is create this direct connection between the Penn and Camden Mark lines and allow for significant operational benefits by providing that direct and efficient access from that Riverside facility from the Penn line, rather than changing lines at DC's Union Station. So allow us to cross over. Today, we have to go all the way down to Union Station, change those lines, and then come back. And so there's some operational challenges as part of that. And as the Penn line also serves Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, which I serve on the commission as well, this improvement is going to optimize both of those services. It would eliminate the need to store overnight cars at Penn Station by having them at the Mount Clair yard. So it's going to enable Mark to address the crowding on the existing Penn line trains that we were starting to see pre-pandemic. But also because of its location south of the BMP tunnel, it could still operate even when the tunnel is closed and be able to kind of move through that. So right now, this project is in the D&E program in our CTP, but we're actively working on the planning component of this. And we're also pursuing necessary negotiations and discussions with CSX as well as Norfolk Southern to move that project closer to shovel ready. So the next investment we'll make here is to purchase the necessary right of way and complete the design. But ultimately, we're looking at about an $80 million price tag to complete its construction of this important connection. And it's a project that we would focus on as part of that infrastructure bill. Switching over to one I'm really excited about, because I probably have worked on it a couple of times over the course of my 25 years at MDOT, kind of touching it here or there in different roles. But one piece of our transportation system that stands to significantly benefit from this infrastructure package is the BMP tunnel. So this tunnel was built just after the Civil War. So it's 148 years old, and it really needs to be replaced. I know Don's on this call. I think Don was in the planning director seat when we got the NEPA approval on this one a couple of years ago. But it's a really important project. So the BMP tunnel today serves about 9 million Mark and Amtrak customers annually. But it also suffers from a variety of issues related to its age and its condition. So first, structural deterioration. So the age of the structure combined with excessive amounts of water leaking, you can probably see some of that in that picture, into the tunnel, and the walls flowing underneath the track has led to we have bricks falling and concrete hitting the floor of that tunnel. It also doesn't have any fire and life safety systems. So although it's still deemed safe for use today, the existing tunnel doesn't have that fire and life safety systems, meaning ventilation to clear smoke from fires, emergency egress, and unfortunately a retrofit of those facilities is just not possible. So we just need to replace this tunnel. And so when things happen in this tunnel, it gets shut down and really impacts our service. On top of that, it just has excessive maintenance needs. The tunnel's age and the issues require maintenance and inspection on an ongoing basis. But as an example, spent $71 million replacing portions of just the track in the tunnel last year. From an operational standpoint, I like to think of this tunnel as our single point of failure. So the BMP tunnel is the only Northeast Corridor tunnel where both tracks rely on one single structure. There's no redundancy and no detours possible if the tunnel had to close unexpectedly, and that happens frequently. The segment is the biggest rail bottleneck between Washington and New Jersey today. The delays are chronic. More than 10% of our weekday train trips are delayed, and delays occur on 99% of all weekdays. So it's a significant issue for us, but it's going to have a lot of opportunity. I had the opportunity to tour the tunnel with the CEO of Amtrak earlier this year, and I can personally attest to the condition of that tunnel, but also the opportunity that comes with it. So we had an event back in June to talk about what that new vision for the tunnel will be. And we did it as part of Amtrak's 50th anniversary. We had a great group of stakeholders and supporters that all got together and came together at the mouth of the tunnel and celebrated the commitment to replace the BMP, but also to rename it the Frederick Douglass Tunnel. And so in honor of Frederick Douglass, we actually had some of his family there with us to help us celebrate that. It was just an amazing day. But when you think about the benefits, so I've talked about the challenges of the existing tunnel. So let's talk about the benefits of a new tunnel. So it's going to address that safety, reliability, and efficiency issues in the existing tunnel. That means we will save 7 hours of train delays per weekday. A new tunnel is going to generate about 30,000 jobs, including 20,000 construction jobs. There's also going to be an investment in improvements in West Baltimore at the West Baltimore MARC station as part of this, along with some other community improvements. And finally, the regional economic catalyst that it's going to be. So replacement of this tunnel is going to allow for 30-minute MARC service to DC. So 30-minute MARC service between Penn Station and Union Station that is really going to greatly expand the job accessibility in both regions and really bring those regions together and create a lot of jobs and housing opportunities for Baltimore residents when we get there. So we're excited about this one. We do think that it's going to get some investment. We had an NEC commission call this week and talked about this project a little bit, but also kind of where it is in Amtrak's priorities and where MDOT is on being at the table and being an active partner in making sure that we get this tunnel replaced. But, so it could, the IIJA that they're debating in DC could potentially provide a significant investment directly to Amtrak for this project. But in the meantime, we're committed to these ongoing and productive coordination efforts with Amtrak because we're focused on the design and phasing options today that we're getting ready to be there. So when that funding is there, we can make sure that we are ready to make that investment. So we made an investment in the acquisition of those dual locomotives already, meaning that they can run on gas or electric, but provide us with those cost saving options for the new tunnel. So we've made the investment in the dual locomotives. We made a small investment in our CTP this year to show our commitment, and we're currently laying out the financial plans and design plans with Amtrak today. So we're really excited about that project, and I'm really excited about getting that one moving. Switching over to our LOTS program, and then I can happy to stick around and kind of answer any questions you may have, but kind of finishing up on LOTS. So to wrap things up on the local transit front, as we've been kind of traveling the state on our CTP tours, a question that comes up pretty frequently is what benefits our local transit providers could get from the IIJA. So what we're seeing in the draft bill is a potential for about a 30% increase or more in LOTS funding over that 5-year period from 22 to 27. So there'd still be a need to be additional determinations made by FTA, but we think it could mean some significant additional investment for local transit programs looking to enhance and expand their service and explore fleet replacements, conversions to zero emission fleets, and addressing some of the local state of good repair systems. Just right outside of Baltimore City, I was able to celebrate with Baltimore County on their launch of their local program, their circulator, and we're really excited about that one. But we're also thinking about these integrated systems, the local systems in our MTA system, and how it can be integrated and adaptable and smart. So with that, I'll thank you again for having me here this morning. I think I hit you with probably a ton of information. We're happy to share the presentation with you that you can share with whoever you like, and there's a lot of information in it. But at this point, I'll turn it back over to Robin and see if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Secretary Slater. Yes, we would like to open the floor to questions, comments, and feedback.
Sure.
I know that there are several comments in the chat. Jimmy, did you have a question? Jimmy, you have to unmute yourself. Let me see if I can unmute Jimmy.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Greg, I'm really impressed by your commitment to public transit, and this whole presentation is just, to me, it's just impressive, and I'm really grateful for it. And we've been in existence for 10 years pushing for better public transit, and as far as I'm concerned, this is the best response we've ever gotten out of MDOT in terms of progressive thinking about transit. And as part of that, I want to say that I think an important component of increasing ridership is to let people know all the things that are going on. And we need to market this. I see billboards saying, different aspects of the improvement, signs inside of buses and light rails, talking about different things that are happening and the signs changing month after month so that people get a sense of excitement. I think it's so important to what you're doing to create that sense of excitement. I just want to thank you and say that I just feel that marketing has to be a part of this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a big part of what we do. It's funny. Sometimes it tends to be like an afterthought unless we're talking about like a new service or something along that line. But I think many people don't realize all that we're doing. I will tell you that we still have a lot of work to do to be where we want to be on our system. But where we're focused right now is one, that safe and reliable system that our customers can count on, focusing on making sure it's a first-class system. So integrated, where people feel comfortable and safe, both from a rider perspective, but also from a health perspective. But also just getting the most out of it with these local and state partnerships and thinking about the stations around it and transit-oriented development, which I'm really working hard to try and get some energy back behind our transit-oriented development program because I think it could be tremendous for our system. But I will tell you, I'll work with our marketing folks to see if we can kind of start pushing some of this out so that people can really understand, but also most importantly, so that when they know that we're doing this, they can give us some feedback and help us kind of shape it because, we can't get to where we want to be unless everybody's at the table and groups like you are at the table helping us kind of shape the direction and program. But, we're making some choices today, trying to figure out, it's funny, Holly and I have been debating, I've watched transit agencies for 20 years, kind of chase that choice rider. And so, we can put some energy behind chasing that choice rider. And there's a lot of land use development components that come with that. But I'm a big proponent of let's provide the highest quality service that we can for the people that need it the most. And so focusing, in Baltimore, those zero car households, 2/3 of the households in Baltimore either have one or zero vehicles. And so they rely on our transit system to get to work, and it needs to be regular, it needs to be integrated, it needs to be reliable and safe. But we're very focused on it. So thank you for recognizing that.
Klaus, I see that you
just
had
one other comment.
Sure.
Can I make one other comment, Robin? The reliability criticism of Baltimore Link is, you hear it all the time in the paper and from other public figures. And yet the problem comes down to being 80 drivers short for the MTA. And I think it's an important campaign would be to fill those positions. And that should be a public campaign.
Absolutely.
People ought to be aware that you need people and that this is the cause of the lack of reliability. People understand that we're used to dealing with the pandemic now, and there's shortages all over the place. So I think it's important that we explain to people that the reliability is being caused by a lack of bus drivers, and we campaign to get those positions filled.
It does. And so it's funny you mentioned that because we are looking at putting together kind of a big, really public campaign on recruitment. And I'm trying to kind of understand, what's our best tool in recruiting those drivers. Let me push it over to mobility for a second. So we were more than 100 drivers short on our mobility service and our paratransit services and experiencing some real challenges with that system. As part of our contract, we have 2 private sector providers that provide that service. And, the pay was around $16 an hour. What we saw in the pandemic was as service was scaling back, those drivers were going over and getting jobs at the e-commerce facilities, the Amazons of the world. And so they were not coming back. And so we were trying to get out there and recruit. So, we started to kind of look at how we can enhance the pay in part of our contract. So our new contract is around $18 an hour. And I'll give you an example of that. So we go to $17 an hour. We go back and get approval, and we're going to the Board of Public Works approval for 18. But when we went to 18, the amount of applicants tripled for the system by $2 an hour more pay, because we have to be competitive. We have to be offering benefits. We have to be making it a great place to work and a rewarding experience for them to come work with us, but also to stay.
Well, thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do, just in the interest of time before we move on to our second presentation, is I would like to just sort of mention a couple of items that are in the chat. One question is, what are the plans for the tunnel east of Penn Station?
So that's all part of our BMP tunnel project includes other bridges and those types of things. So it would all be part of this kind of bigger, broader overhaul. If it's helpful for this group, so the plans have somewhat changed a little bit as we've kind of scaled them to be more achievable. If it's helpful, I can follow up and pull an information sheet together from our team, and you can share that with your team.
That would be very, very helpful. Thank you. Another question in the chat has to do with a 30-minute MARC train to DC, would there be any need for competing maglev train that ends in Westport? And why is MDOT supporting that project?
Sure, good question. So the maglev project is it's coming through us, but it's being led by the private sector. So we see that as a little bit of a different market as these projects kind of go hand in hand, but they're kind of developing separately on separate tracks. But we're at the table with Amtrak focused on BMP tunnel and then supporting the development work on maglev as part of the process being led by the private sector. So that's a project that we're supporting through the process today, but we're waiting to see the outcome of their environmental studies and their NEPA studies, whereas the BMP tunnel has already gone through that process and has the approval for the NEPA process.
And the last question, at least for today, and I will share the chat with you, is with the BMP tunnel, what will be done to prevent destructive effects on the old historic houses?
A really, really good question. So that's a big part of what we're focused on today. So there's some track lowering and then replenishment of the tunnels and those types of things. And then some new tunneling that's coming through. And that's a big part of the NEPA approval that we got, vibrations, those types of things, but protecting a lot of that historic. When we eliminated the need for the ventilation shafts, that created some extra layer of protection because we didn't have to kind of get into more of that surface piece. But that's a big focus of what we're doing. And those measures will absolutely have to be in place to protect the historic nature of those communities that it impacts.
Well, thank you again, Secretary Slater. Wonderful and informative presentation. We wish that we had more time, but as I mentioned, I will be happy to share in a separate document to you other comments and feedback that we received regarding your presentation.
Absolutely, Robin. I just thank you for having me. I thank the whole group for being here and for engaging. If you send me the whole chat, I'll make sure you get written responses as follow-ups to all of them. And please share with everyone that's been on here, and we'll follow up with a copy of the presentation. But we're going to keep going after this full speed ahead.
That would be wonderful and most appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
It is my pleasure to introduce our next guest speaker, who is Don Halligan. Don is a Senior Transportation Planner with the Metropolitan Council. Don's presentation today is titled Baltimore Regional Transportation Board, Baltimore Regional Transit Governance and Funding Study. Welcome, Don.
Hi, good morning. Happy Friday to everyone.
Thank you.
Let me share my presentation here.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's not the screen I wanted to share. It's this one. opening PowerPoint in Zoom is a challenge. I assume you can see my slide now?
We
Blue?
can.
Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. Well, good morning, everybody. Don Halligan from the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. I'm here today to kind of follow up on a presentation I made in June to the group to talk about findings of our study that we completed here. Just actually, the final version went up in August, so it's relatively new. Looking at the transit governance issues and funding issues in the Baltimore region. Just want to give a little bit of the background. I know my time is short, but I will just whip through this so that folks have a sense of where they are if they didn't hear me speak about this in June. In June, I tried to bring everybody up to speed of the process that we went through, and short of the findings, because we were in the midst of making those findings. So we went through a series of steps to get to findings on governance issues and funding, coming up with a series of alternatives, kind of a spectrum of alternatives for governance, and several funding options. The approaches are we broke it down month by month, met with our board, the BRTB board, first talking about history, looking at the current system, doing a financial review of MTA and the lot systems, some peer analysis, looking at peer agencies around the state and country, came up with some funding alternatives, came up with funding options. So that's generally it. We looked at, we had some goals for the study, looking at how to improve coordination of transit in the region, how to improve the quality of service, how to improve connections, how to increase investment, how to enhance our decision-making, and how to ensure equitable investment across the systems. To give you a sense of the scale of the difference between MTA's fleet and the locally operated transit systems, the lots, we created a little slide here to give you a sense, orders of magnitude larger at MTA than service that's provided at the local level.
Don, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're seeing the report slide, but there are no individual slides. So we're seeing on the screen
Yeah.
a slide that has BRTB final report.
Let me try this again. Sorry about that.
There we go.
Do you see the system?
Yes.
All right. So that's what I was just referring to, this slide. 94 million trips provided by MTA in 2019 compared to 3.8 million. Order of magnitude difference in the size of the number of vehicles and the trips provided by MTA versus the locally operated transit systems. Just to give you a sense of where MTA sits, it's one of the modal administrations that Secretary Slater sits over. There are a variety of others: SHA, MVA, MAA. He is the chair of the Toll Authority, Transportation Authority, and sits on the WMATA board. Within MTA, MDOT MTA, there are really three operations that this slide gives you a sense of how budgetarily and operationally it operates. The MTA operates. They provide the Baltimore system, which is directly operated services. That's the bulk of their work. They contract out commuter bus and MARC services, and they fund a portion of the locally operated transit system. So there's three elements, primary elements of MTA that we're going to be focusing on. This slide gives you a sense of the investments that were made in 2019 on transit. Overall, it's 1.1 billion by both the state and the local systems. And the Baltimore system is almost $780 or almost $800 million, $341 million here. That in the totals. Investments by jurisdictions. We tried to break this down. It's very difficult to get here, but you get a sense that most of the service is within Baltimore City. You can see that by the investment here. Second comes Baltimore County and then Anne Arundel, and that reflects really the state investment here, and that is principally where the MTA core system operates. Mentioned we learned some lessons from other regions, looking at the authority, responsibility, decision-making, and funding structures by these places. We looked at SEPTA in Philadelphia, CATS in the Charlotte area, North Carolina, UTA in Utah, Salt Lake City.
The perfect place.
The SMART system in Southeast Michigan, Metro Transit in St. Louis, and WMATA. We did a scan of how folks primarily fund transit around the country. Most is through sales taxes. You can see other options like tolling, property taxes, income taxes, and vehicle taxes here, and bonding. So some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of our current system. It's funded and governed at the state level. So it kind of releases the responsibility to run the service and to fund the service off the shoulders of the local governments. But that there's limited input as a result of that. There's obviously financial obligations, limited, and there's limited interaction between MTA and the locally operated transit systems. The LOTS agencies are locally funded and governed. There is local control over their development. There's limited interaction between the MTA, as we mentioned, and the local locally operated systems. And there's more of a responsibility to fund, so that naturally they get more say. Some of the ideas about funding we came up with and looked into. These are some of the sources, some major sources, meaning higher yields, some secondary sources, lower yields, and these other sources that are kind of out there and not used very often for transit, but could possibly be used. We wanted to understand if these sources were stable. Are they robust enough? Are they going to survive impacts like the pandemic? And Maryland is a small state, so there's a lot of leakage of these of money. So how do we address that? We want to understand. Is it fair? Who's paying it? Who's benefiting? Are the costs shared equally? We want to understand how much we can raise. What's the yield? What's the right level of funding? So we came up with estimates of yield. These are statewide sources, so there's a larger pool to draw from. Obviously, a VMT tax gives you incredibly high, if set, at certain levels can yield very high annual money for operating transit systems. Another add-on income tax, sales taxing. You can see how it drops from there. This is what we estimated the funding need to be about $35 million a year. At least we needed a yield from. So you could easily imagine if you implement any one of these that are above this red line, you could get there pretty easily. If you were to kind of narrow that down, that pool down into the region, you still could do, you know, with the ones in green, you could still get there, but you may have to cobble together others if you're not, if you feel you can't use some of these, you need to use some of these, you'll need to cobble those together to get to the level we estimate we need annually. So I want to talk a bit about the governance models. This is what you came here for. We wanted to understand how we had 6 options, and we want to understand this is a spectrum. If you think about it as a spectrum, there's a lot of details that obviously would need to be worked out. Those details, you can imagine a lot of those details having impacts that you'd have to offset. So these are general concepts for how a governance structure could be set up to begin to address some of the issues. They all have problems. They all have opportunities. So evaluating the impact and the potential benefits against the disruption to the system. We kind of thought about this spectrum in that way. So obviously the do nothing is, you know, it's going to have no disruption to the current system, but may have lower impact. And the last option there is the Baltimore Regional Transit Authority. That is a full-blown entity. We'll talk about in a second. Similar to WMATA, obviously could potentially disrupt the existing system fundamentally, vastly, and but it could have high impacts and benefits. So you know, this is how it operates today. So the status quo option, keep it as it is. This is sort of standard practice for any kind of planning study. We look at, this is always an option, is to keep it as it is. There are many issues and there are benefits to the way it operates, as I think we all can attest and imagine. The first real option here is designating the State Transportation Commission. There is such an entity that exists. It is housed at the Maryland Department of Transportation, has, I believe, 8 members and 1 vacancy currently. It sits over all the business units of the DOT, and its role generally is to advise the secretary. Generally, it serves a role for the secretary that is small at the moment. It could be broadened if with some legislative assistance, could be very focused. It could assign major decisions to the State Transportation Commission that could look at transit or fundamentally across the investments the department makes on all modes. This option wouldn't directly change the funding. It could increase transparency. Depending upon how it's set up, it could diversify and share decision-making. It could provide more input by local governments and address more regional coordination in the Baltimore region. This is the State Transit Commission would be an entity that sits between MDOT and MTA, provide advice to the Secretary on transit investments and transit policies and services. The MTA would, in this option, would retain responsibilities for planning and operations, but this body could provide them some oversight and some advice. The administrator in this option would receive direction by this Transit Commission, and the administrator would be basically serving two bosses, the Secretary and the Commission itself. Sorry, the fourth option we came up with was the Baltimore Transit Board Baltimore Transit Advisory Board. That is an entity that sits between MTA, the MTA administration, and the Baltimore core services. So we talked about the core services lots and the commuter services as being the primary services that MTA provides. This board would be focused on the core services within, that's the Baltimore core system, bus system and light rail and metro in the region, and provide advice and direction to the administrator. The administrator would be responsible to the Baltimore Advisory Board. You could imagine this board being made up of local elected officials or local members to have a little more input and make more regional decisions. The fifth option is a joint state regional commission focused on the region. We're beginning to move a little bit towards an RTA, but what we're calling here the BTC is focused on the Baltimore region and manages and oversees transit investments. Some of the lots could participate in it. They wouldn't be mandatory. So, for instance, Harford County could send a commissioner, but it's a pay-to-play kind of option here, where those that receive direct service from MTA now would be required to participate, and those that do not, the three here, could opt in and grow the benefits and the responsibility for transit functioning in the region. In this option, the administrator remains an MDOT employee, but reports directly to the Transit Commission. I should have said in the beginning that all of these assume that the state is making at least the current level of investment in the transit system. So definitely holds true here. But this begins to require the local governments to begin to pay into and operate as a regional system transit. And the largest option is the Regional Transit Authority, similar, as I mentioned, to in operations as WMATA would be, manages and oversees and helps fund the transit system throughout the region. So again, some of the lots can join or remain independent. Again, if they are joining, they're going to be required to to centrally fund, at least in this option, the decision making. So the administrator would then become an employee of the RTA. The RTA may or may not be run by in this option, the RTA would own and operate the system. So the system would need to be moved from MTA into this RTA, and all the assets redesignated to this new entity. But it offers a centralized body to plan, organize, and operate the transit system in the region. It increases transit funding by having local participation into that, into a central entity providing that, funding that. It would be disruptive to existing transit service, so the switchover would likely cause some pain. The lots may or may not want to participate, and raising money is going to be difficult in any of these options. We tried to go back and compare these governance models against the goals we set early on, and this is outlined a little bit in more detail in the report. And the next steps, we're out there talking about this study. We have had some discussions with the board members, our BMC board members, as well as the BRTB, about what to do, and we expect that some legislation will again appear in the General Assembly session coming up here in January. And it'll likely require us to go down there and begin to have this conversation. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much, Don.
You're welcome.
We would like to open the floor to questions, comments, or feedback.
So, Don,
Don, would you be able to, here we go, thank you.
Our board meeting was about funding from the state legislature. One legislature cannot obligate the next. So in the Regional Transit Authority option, how do you get a commitment that is ongoing that could be changed with each legislature? How do you avoid that?
I don't know that I have a good answer for that, Jimmy. This is going to take that big of a change would take time to dial in, and so I imagine that if there were a General Assembly that bought into this and said, all right, we're going to an RTA in the Baltimore region, creating an authority, it would be a pretty heavy lift and probably would take several sessions to dial in, and the changes that would need to happen. I can't see that happening overnight. It just would be very disruptive. It would be huge. So my guess, and this is purely my own guess, it does not reflect my the BRTB. My guess is we're going to see something a little more incremental.
Thank you. Jim, Linus, you had a comment?
Yes, let's see if I can get my beautiful face up here. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. I think the funding is the fundamental issue in the region. If you look back at it was one of the early slides, the jurisdictional funding for that is applied to MTA's operation throughout the region. You see a huge disparity between population of each jurisdiction and the amount of money spent. Baltimore County is the biggest jurisdiction, has something like 860,000 residents. And, it really has nothing even close to Baltimore City's funding. And so the big problem we've got to get past is the idea that local governments want public transit. You can't really get any kind of realistic support of a regional transit authority if you don't solve that. The desire for transit is a big issue in our region. And it's the reason our system is so dysfunctional, I believe. Don?
Yes, Jim, I think you put your finger right on the issue. It's that is the challenge, right? So raising that money, having people feel comfortable paying that money for a service, that's that'll be the magic. I agree.
Joe, are you still with us?
I am. I'm not as good looking as Jim Liana, so I don't know if I'm going to put my video on. Plus, it's 2 hours earlier where I am right now. I don't think you'd want to see my bagging, my eyes and everything. Yeah, so value capture is kind of the key. I had an earlier question for Slater, Secretary Slater, and we didn't have time for it, but I'm so happy that he is going to be going back and answering all the questions. I think the key is twofold. They both have to do with value, if I can wrap the two in together. It's when we put a public dollar down on any particular transit project or location, we're hoping that it has a synergistic effect, multiplier effect of $2 or $3, not only coming from the private sector, but just the value that it would create. Just as an example, when the red line, and not to use that particular line, but in DC for Armada came out of DC and all the way up to Gaithersburg, it created the redevelopment and incremental redevelopment of that whole corridor over time. So could it be measured historically? Yes, it can be measured. And was it effective? Yes. So the same type of, program needs to occur here, figuring out what the prioritization is in regards to the ROI of the public dollar, accompanied by the private dollar that believes in the project that you're putting that public dollar in, so that they put their own money on the roulette wheel. So I guess the question is, how we get these metrics in place to, one, prioritize, and two, to measure the value creation.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity. The value capture is definitely an opportunity. Of course, the Washington region has a vastly different real estate market than the Baltimore region. But it doesn't mean you can't take advantage of sites that are being developed that that might be able to benefit from a transit link. How do you measure that? It's something that the BRTB could do. It's something that the local governments could do. It's something that the state could do in some kind of study to understand maybe past investments linked to the transit network that we have now. That would be a piece of research, I would think.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also mentioned, and I'm just going to mention this term because I think it's cute. We have tax increment financing as a TIF,
Mhm.
and we use that for private projects such as, Port Covington, other locations. A little bit controversial in that it directly applies to a private development. Why not transportation infrastructure financing that basically does the same thing, but is actually centered in an area, call it the geographic polygon area, around an expected epicenter or transit station where the value capture is anticipated to grow.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that all these are alternative financing methods. It's not a funding method, meaning, it's a one-off kind of thing. You could, they could fund maybe branches or pieces of a rail system or bus lines, at least to start. A TIF, for instance, you have to eventually start paying taxes on it, and yeah, and the taxes coming in are frozen at a lower level, so that you're benefiting from that private investment up front, but you're not making any money to maintain the system and maintain the and maintain it. You're buying into it.
Don, thank you. We'll have to leave it at that. We know that the meeting has run over this morning, and we appreciate those of you that are still with us. So this is the conclusion of our meeting today. Don, I will send you the comments and feedback in the chat, and you can feel free to respond as you see fit. So once again, we thank our guest speakers for their very informative and relevant presentations. We especially thank each of you that join us monthly for these meetings. This is part of our mission, is to communicate important information that's happening in the public transit arena, but also to give access to key leaders and leadership to be able to have your voices heard. So we thank you again for sharing part of your morning with us. Details will be forthcoming about the November Transit Choices meeting. So goodbye and have a wonderful day.